Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the New Liberal Podcast, part of the Center for New Liberalism. I'm your host, Jeremiah Johnson, and today, unfortunately, is one of those episodes that is pretty serious and unfortunate to have to do. But today, we are talking about the Charlie Kirk assassination. I'm recording this in the early hours of Thursday, the 11th. This happened on Wednesday. There's still a lot we don't know. We don't know what the shooter's motivation was. We don't know a lot. We're still trying to figure things out. But this seems like a pretty momentous thing that happened, and we need to talk about it. If the current episode here is a little bit more scattered than usual, please just know that, doing this on very little sleep, to be honest, and on short notice with kind of a quicker production time. So, doing the best that we can over here on my end. But I felt like it was important to get this out quickly and to get it out. I- It feels like there are some important things to say that are more important than making sure that all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted as far as production values go. So to just jump right into it, right-wing political activist Charlie Kirk, infamous political personality, founder of Turning Points USA, was shot and killed yesterday attending an event at Utah Valley University. Now, this is unfortunately not the first time, and hope probably won't even be the last time that in the last few years that we've had prominent assassination attempts happen in America. Last year, when there was an assassination attempt on Donald Trump, I did a episode and I talked and I wrote about the idea of liberalism at its core. What really is liberalism when you get down to the very, very basics of liberalism? Why do we oppose political violence? Because the first thing that always happens when an attack like this happens is that every political figure comes together to condemn the violence. And I think this is the morally correct choice, but it's worth kind of talking about why that is. And I've done this before. I did this last year after the Donald Trump assassination attempt. I talked about how, I obviously disagree with Donald Trump and with Charlie Kirk about nearly everything, but that doesn't mean that we should kill them. The original purpose of liberalism was to stop that from having to happen. I go back to European history and I think about, before the Enlightenment, before liberalism was really a force in Europe, what you had post Martin Luther nailing the 95 Theses on the door of a church, you had hundreds of years of religious violence. And that violence was often pretty barbaric. This was unrelenting wars between Catholics and Protestants. Some people thought the Pope should lead the church. Other people thought there was a new, shiny version of Christianity that was better than Catholicism. And they killed each other over it for hundreds of years. And not in a nice, clean, chivalrous way, in like a genocidal massacre kind of way, where they would kill entire towns of people for choosing the wrong side, where they would parade around their enemies' corpses as trophies, where, they would rip the beating hearts out of the chest of their enemies. Suffice it to say that nobody was having a good time. And then Enlightenment liberalism comes along, and I'm simplifying a lot here, but liberalism kind of proposes the solution that, hey, maybe Catholics and Protestants can stop killing each other. And maybe each person or each town or each country can choose for itself what religion it would like to be. And that seems like a very simple idea right now, but that was not how things worked for most of human history. That was a revolutionary idea. And through this kind of liberal bargain of you don't kill me and I won't kill you, Europe was able to escape the cycle of never ending religious warfare. And liberalism formalized ideas like freedom of religion and the separation of church and state, and the idea that you should govern via the consent of the governed. And at its core, that is what liberalism is, especially small L philosophical liberalism is a piece of civilizational technology to prevent civil wars. Liberalism is the contract that we have as a society with one another that says that we should settle our disputes through ideas and laws and debate rather than settling them at the end of a sword. And so this is something I wrote and I talked about last year in the wake of Donald Trump's assassination attempt. And I I feel like that point is still very underappreciated. That the world is so peaceful today relative to the past that most of us just don't have a sense of how bad it can get. We don't have a sense of why that taboo on political violence is so strong, how brutal and how violent the world can be without it. Because for most of human history, violence was not the exception, it was the rule. So, because I am a liberal and because I understand the core values and the core ideals of liberalism, I am always against acts of political violence like this. Trying to assassinate the president is wrong. Trying to assassinate political commentators you don't like is wrong. And I, like everyone else, condemn that without hesitation. And when I talked about this last year, I remember that I closed with a plea. And that plea was please don't take for granted what generations of liberalism has won for society. You know, please refuse to participate in this polarization, in this, walking up further and further closer to the line of political violence. Remember that the whole idea is that we need to be allowed to disagree with someone without discriminating against them, without harassing them, without killing them. And that is a really precious thing that we've won in society. And please don't take it for granted. And what I worry about now that I'm still talking about this same idea a year later is that my plea has not been heard by the rest of society. I I think, unfortunately, that American society seems to be forgetting the purpose of liberalism and that we are backsliding into a new era of political violence. Look at things that we've seen in the past few years. There was a plot to kidnap Gretchen Whitmer, who's the governor of Michigan. There was the storming of the Capitol by an armed mob on January 6th, 2021. There were pipe bombs in 2021 set outside both the DNC and the RNC headquarters. Both Democratic and Republican Party headquarters got pipe bombs put there. We had the assassination of Brian Thompson, who is the CEO of United Healthcare, by Luigi Mangione, or I guess he hasn't been convicted yet, but it sure seems like it was him. Donald Trump actually had multiple assassination attempts, if you remember. There was the assassination and the shooting of state level legislators in Minnesota. There was the attempted kidnapping of Nancy Pelosi, where someone broke into her house attempting to kidnap her, and she was not there, so they instead brutally assaulted her husband, Paul Pelosi, instead. There was the murder of Israeli embassy staffers just within the last year, I believe, by a pro-Palestinian gunman. There have been shootings at the homes of New Mexico legislators. There was an attempted kidnapping of the mayor of Memphis. Someone firebombed Josh Shapiro's governor's mansion in Pennsylvania. There was an anti-vax political shooting at the Center for Disease Control headquarters. There's just been so much. I haven't even talked about the shooting with Steve Scalise or Gabby Giffords. Those were even a few years back, but all of this is within like the last 4 years. And now we have this assassination of Charlie Kirk. And I am just deeply, deeply worried about the state of American society. The idea that we are free from political violence is something that we won over the course of hundreds of years. It's not something that's the default. It's not something that we should take for granted. There's no iron law that says that this is going to be a permanent state of affairs. We are in a very dangerous place right now. And I think that's the first thing, the first point that we all have to land on. But the second point that I think we have to talk about is that if we're in a dangerous place, any honest account of how we got here has to include people like Charlie Kirk. Charlie Kirk was not a good person. Now, he absolutely did not deserve to be killed for his lack of virtue. And anyone who suggests that he did deserve to be killed is not my friend and they are not my ally. But just because he died, I won't gloss over how vile many of his beliefs are and the massive negative effect he had on American society. He was an avatar for everything that's wrong with modern American politics. Someone who chased clickbait at the expense of real political dialogue and engagement. Somebody who took dunking on the libs, owning the libs into the status of practically being a religion. He was a dishonest huckster at the best of times and one of the foulest and most cynical bigots at the worst of times. I don't want to spend this episode just sitting down and talking about the many areas of policy disagreement I have with Charlie Kirk. I don't think that would be a particularly good use of my time or yours to just sit down and recount all the bigoted things he said about gay people, trans people, all the, comments about how black crime is blah, 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 blah. And even the more banal stuff, tax policy, spending policy, corruption within the Trump administration. Somebody else can go do that. Somebody can document all of the horrible things he believed and said and all the terrible policies he endorsed and all the corruption that he was happy to participate in. Somebody else can do that. Instead, I want to focus on a single area that is relevant in this moment, and that is that Charlie Kirk was part of the machine that has been legitimizing political violence in America. He was part of that process. Now, Charlie Kirk is one of the primary examples of somebody who was happy to kind of increase political polarization and increase political hatred. It was his job, essentially, to make the two sides hate each other. He certainly wanted conservatives to hate and fear liberals, and he also was more than happy for liberals to hate and fear him. He was not somebody who was dedicated to the real ideas of let's sit down together and have constructive dialogues and let's talk it out and let's see if we can find some common ground. He liked to do debates, but for him, debates were purely a way to farm clips to show on social media, to snip something either in context or out of context and show how much of a good dunk he could get. And it was especially kind of lame because he, as someone who traveled around and basically did this professionally, would pick on, some random 19-year-old with purple hair who knows almost nothing about politics but has a lot of feelings. And it's fine that that kid exists, but Charlie Kirk's job was to find them and elevate them and humiliate them. And so he was one of the leading proponents of increasing political polarization in this country, making us hate each other more, not less. He also was instrumental in the rise of Donald Trump. He was early on the Trump train. And Trump is obviously a man who has promoted political violence over and over. Trump used to suggest that, quote, Second Amendment people should take matters into their own hands to deal with Hillary Clinton. Trump is on the record asking police to shoot protesters, advocating that we should shoot migrants crossing the border, and all kinds of stuff. You can find this all over the place. It's almost not worth the time to just list out all the ways that Donald Trump promotes violence. It's very obvious that he does. But beyond his promotion of polarization and beyond his promotion of Donald Trump, Charlie Kirk himself has also danced around with political violence. And he was smart enough to never say outright, I think it's good to kill people for the sake of politics. But he did the thing that you do when you're smart. He danced around it. When Paul Pelosi, who we mentioned earlier, was attacked in his home, Charlie Kirk, laughing on his podcast, smiling with a smug little grin on his face, told his podcast audience that they would be real patriots if they bailed out the attacker, and then started immediately spinning conspiracy theories about how the guy didn't really deserve to have bail. It's just that the Pelosi's get treated differently. Charlie Kirk promoted a book by Jack Posobiec about, I mean, I don't even know what to call it. It's a book that advocates for the systemic mass murder of socialists. It looks at what Pinochet did in Chile and what Franco did in Spain. And this book says we should do more things like they did. We should be more like those fascist regimes were. And we should just systematically kill socialists, all of them. And Charlie Kirk promoted that book, had a very friendly podcast episode with Jack Posobiec. Charlie Kirk likes to publicly muse about how we should have more executions, and in fact, they should be public executions. We should stage them in public. And more than just putting them in the middle of cities so that everybody can watch them, we should put them on television. We should bring children to watch them. He's had debates about how young should a child be before we bring them to their first public execution. The man has a fascination with violence. He obviously personally organized buses to send people to the January 6th insurrection. He historically uses charged language, talking about civil war, emphasizing how violent the left is and saying that conservatives need to be ready. I say all of this because in the coming days, people are going to say a lot of things about Charlie Kirk. And especially when someone dies, they try to show them in the best light. And people will say, oh, well, Charlie Kirk was committed to the ideas and to debate. And it's true that he did travel around to college campuses to kind of air quotes debate students. But I think it would be a mistake to only remember him for that. I think it would be a mistake to paint him as a champion for nonviolent engagement because Charlie Kirk, for a long time, has been flirting with violence in both his rhetoric and his actions. And ironically, one of the few moments of honesty that I will credit to Charlie Kirk's political life comes on this exact topic. There are some comments that Charlie Kirk has made in the past that are now making the rounds on social media in the wake of his death. And the one that strikes me the most is something he said in 2023 about gun violence and the Second Amendment. And he said, and I'll quote, I think it's worth it to have a cost of, unfortunately, some gun deaths every single year so that we can have the Second Amendment to protect our other God given rights. That is a prudent deal. It is rational. Nobody talks like this. They live in a complete alternate universe. And I will give Charlie Kirk credit. This is an honest look at the trade offs involved in American gun policy. There are a lot of people who are pro gun or who are guns rights activists or whatever, and they like to pretend that America has this outlier level of gun violence for some other mysterious reason that has nothing to do with our gun control policy or the fact that we have more guns in this country per capita than anywhere else in the world. It must be some other factor. It must be mental health. It must be the schools or the epidemic of not having fathers in the home or whatever. And that's all nonsense, obviously. The reason that America has far, far more gun violence than any other rich country is because we have far, far more guns. And we have a far looser set of regulations governing firearms than anywhere else. So some people will kind of take that dishonest approach. They will equivocate, they will deflect to other issues, they'll pretend like a country with hundreds of millions of guns floating around can somehow end gun violence through some other means. But Charlie Kirk took an honest approach, and that is to say, well, we're going to have gun deaths. We might even have a lot, but I think the trade off is worth it. It's at least intellectually defensible to say that, to say that, well, the freedom to bear arms will have negative side effects, but those side effects are an acceptable trade in order to safeguard that freedom. Violence, according to this position taken by Charlie Kirk, is worth it. Now, like I said, I think this is an honest position that should be considered seriously. But having considered it seriously, I think that it is seriously wrong. Charlie Kirk and his wife have had, I guess, 2 children under the age of 4. And they will grow up never knowing their father, essentially. Melissa Hortman is the name of the Minnesota legislator who was assassinated earlier this year, just a few months ago. She also had children. They also will never get the chance ever again to speak to their mother, to be held by her, to be comforted, to share a laugh. The American conception of the right to bear arms, which has an unbelievably light touch and regulation, and a complete inability to keep guns out of the hands of maniacs, is not worth the damage it does to those lives. To Charlie Kirk's life and his family's life, to Melissa Hortman's life and her family's life. I believe it is not worth the lives of more than 40,000 people that die from gun violence every year in America. Because we should be clear about the scale of the problem we're talking about here. Like it's almost it would be funny if it wasn't so sad and tragic that the one thing that might end up pushing the Charlie Kirk news off of the front page is that within 30 minutes of him being shot, there was a school shooting in Colorado. And it's like, I don't even know what to do with that, man. I don't even know what to say. That it's just, this is just how things are. This is just how things happen here. There's no other wealthy country in the world that deals with gun violence like we do, that deals with anything near the scale of what we have. And it's because our gun policies are deeply broken. And Charlie Kirk said that violent deaths were a necessary price to pay for the freedom to bear arms. But he's wrong. His life and the lives of millions of Americans affected by gun violence was worth more than the ability to just buy guns on demand in whatever manner, however you'd like to. Now, whenever someone calls for gun control in the wake of a tragic shooting, they are inevitably accused of politicizing the tragedy. Now is not the time, is the kind of thing that people will say with very angry comments. This strikes me as an absurd argument. Number one, because gun violence is a political issue. Of course, it should be politicized. In fact, in a deeply tragically ironic example of this is that one of the last tweets Charlie Kirk will ever send is a post saying explicitly that we should politicize shootings and that that's a good idea. Now, he was talking about a shooting on a bus of a Ukrainian immigrant, a white woman assaulted by a black man who had been in and out of the criminal justice system. And so he wanted to politicize that shooting. But that too is a political issue. This is what politics is talking about things that affects our lives. So it's kind of absurd to say that, well, you're politicizing a tragedy. But it's even more absurd for a second reason, which is that in America, we cannot go a week without a mass shooting of some kind. It literally has not happened all year. Every single week, there's been a mass shooting in America in 2025. So far, as of September 11th, according to a Wikipedia list I found, there have been 309 mass shootings in the United States just this year. 309 mass shootings. It's more than one a day on average. These are shootings defined as anything that ends up with more than 4 injuries or deaths. What do you mean now is not the time? Now is always the time to talk about gun control because we are always killing each other with guns. It does not ever stop happening. Now, I will fully admit I am not a policy expert in this area. I don't know the details, the research of what specific steps would be best when it comes to the different ideas people have around gun control and gun violence. And I would welcome a real discussion about these things. I would welcome a real discussion about red flag laws that have been proposed, about universal background checks, about magazine restrictions, handgun restrictions, mandatory waiting periods, ghost guns, and many more types of things. Perhaps some of these ideas would be helpful. Perhaps some of them would not be. But I'm just pretty damn sure that you don't have to be a policy expert to look at the current situation and see how deeply broken it is. To look at how many people die through big, dramatic, violent attacks like what happened to Charlie Kirk, and through the more mundane murders and gang violence and suicides that never make the front page of the New York Times. There has to be a middle ground between, nobody can have a gun ever and the nightmare that millions of people live through now. Because it is millions of people whose lives are impacted by gun violence. And we shouldn't have to live in a society like this. We should not have to live in a society where legislators and activists and government officials and everyday citizens are just routinely gunned down in broad daylight. That's not something that we have to do, but we are making the choice collectively to do it. Political violence, especially, is getting bad enough and frequent enough that I feel like we're at risk of entering the American version of the Troubles. And we're doing it because what? Because social media is melting our brains, and because our political commentators and our politicians play fast and loose with their calls for political violence, and because we haven't taken serious steps towards gun control in decades. When I think about the victims of gun violence, and I include everyone in here, the victims who are, of great virtue and character, and the victims who are not, either way, they're still victims. And when I think about the best way to honor those victims, I don't think that words mean anything anymore. I don't think that tributes or flags lowered to half mast mean anything at all. I think the best way to honor victims of gun violence is to fix the problem. And that will require things that are uncomfortable and that I don't know that America's ready for. That will require a serious conversation about gun control. It will require an honest assessment of the people who've embraced calls to violence. And I think this is a bigger problem on the political right with people like Donald Trump and Charlie Kirk and many others. But there are some on the far left who do the same thing too. We have to figure out how to stop that. We have to figure out how to back down from the outrage machine that we're all currently trapped in. We desperately need to lower the temperature and step back from this ledge. And I wish I had a positive note to end on here, but I don't know that we're capable of doing it right now. I don't like where America is, and I'm not optimistic that that this is going to be fixed anytime soon, I guess. Donald Trump is still president, and he is almost certain to continue promoting political violence, promoting, his macho tough guy politics that, shows pictures of him firebombing Chicago on social media as though that's a super cool thing for the president of the United States to do. His, vice president 2 days ago is talking about how he doesn't give a shit whether or not the U.S. is committing war crimes. The Secretary of Defense is doing slam poetry in the Oval Office about how he wants maximum lethality, not tepid legality. How he wants violent effect, not politically correct. The most bizarre fucking thing I've ever heard. I'm sorry, I normally don't curse quite that much on this show. That's the leadership of the country. They love to talk about violent imagery. They love to encourage violence, and they're still there. In fact, it would not surprise me if they use Charlie Kirk's death as a pretext for cracking down on, I don't know, on whatever they want to crack down on. I've already seen social media influencers calling for the abolition of the Democratic Party, throw every Democratic politician in jail. And right now it's just, some dude named MAGA Eagle 29 on Twitter. But that's where the kind of stuff starts and it filters its way up. I'm pessimistic because the leadership will still be the same. And frankly, because the social media systems are the same. The systems that reward conflict, that reward escalation, that reward extreme content, anything to get people engaged, anything to make them watch, to get those eyeballs clicking, to make them reply with an outraged comment. Anything that farms that engagement is good. You know what's really good at farming engagement? Calls for violence. And those media systems, those social media algorithms have not changed. They're still in place. There was a poll that was released, ironically, just I think like a day ago, immediately before this happened, that said college students are increasingly comfortable with using violence to suppress speech, which is frightening. I guess the bottom line is that I'm afraid this maybe this is just what America is now. Maybe this is just who we are. Maybe we as a country are like Charlie Kirk in that we can't help but flirt with violence. It's just too alluring. And maybe we just accept violence as a side effect of the other things we really want, which is owning the libs and getting engagement online and whatever other bullshit we're talking about. Maybe that's just what we are. Maybe we are just a rich, violent nation that is slowly forgetting what liberalism is about, what liberalism is for, and descending further and further away from what we should be. I wish that wasn't the case, but when I look at things with clear eyes, that's what I see. I see kind of a return to a more violent era, and I hope that we can interrupt that before it gets even worse. So that's the note we'll close on. We had another episode planned for today, but I'm delaying that one in order to put this out. We have a really cool interview coming with a guy named Dean Spears. Wrote a book called After the Spike about the world's population, how it will be spiking and hitting a peak at some point in the 21st century and then declining afterwards. And, kind of a cool, nerdy book about population policy. What does it mean that we're going to have a declining population? What will that impact? Will it be such a bad thing? How do we make sure that people can have the kids they want to have? Are there any barriers to that? Just kind of a nice policy wonky discussion like we normally do here. That will be coming up next week, and I hope you all tune in to listen to it. It'll probably go out as a Patreon exclusive episode, so members of the Center for New Liberalism will be able to listen. Patreon supporters will be able to listen, but regardless, thank you for tuning in. This is a dark time for the country. I really hope we can get out of it. And I hope that it, oh, if we do get out of it, maybe the Center for New Liberalism will have a part to play. We're working towards that. We appreciate every bit of support that you show us, and we're not going to stop working. So I'll leave it there. Thank you, everyone, and I'll catch you at the next episode.